Fresh off a convincing win in Wisconsin, Ted Cruz will be the only presidential candidate to speak in person at the Colorado Republican State Assembly on Saturday. Meanwhile, 6 of the 13 candidates for U.S. Senate hope to get on the ballot through the convention, joining the 4 who have already submitted petitions earlier this week. Patty, will Colorado begin a surge for Cruz as he heads into Cleveland a few months from now?
Somehow I don't see Colorado really pushing Cruz over the top. You know, it's disappointing for all of us who are going to have a Trumptious weekend here in Colorado because there were rumors that Trump was coming. It looked like it was going to be on his schedule. He pulled out, which I think is good. Somehow I don't see Colorado Springs being real Trump territory. It might be good for Cruz. Certainly, you remember when Colorado Springs, their Eco-Devo plan was to bring a lot of churches there in the 80s and give them tax breaks. And that's one of the reasons Colorado Springs is really the most conservative religious area that we've got in the state. So it's a perfect place for Cruz to go. He'll probably have a great time at that convention. The people who are not going to have a great time are the candidates who are trying to get voted into the Senate primary, because it just doesn't divide very well for people who need to get 30% of the vote.
David, piggybacking what Patty just said, who do you think, at least ideologically, has an advantage at the state assembly if you need 30% minimum to get on the ballot via the convention, and 6 of them are going to be going for it? That's a lot of division. Who has the edge?
Conventional wisdom would be State Senator Tim Neville, who is the favored candidate of Rocky Mountain gun owners and also of Michael Bennet. He's the guy who, if we have a crowded primary, ultimately with other candidates getting on by petition, he could win it with maybe 26%. And that's fine for winning a primary, but I don't think he's got the ability to appeal to a broader share of the Colorado electorate and win the general election. It was a smart move by Trump to not come, because I think he's spending the weekend in New York trying to get his chaos campaign a little more organized. Cruz has followed the Barack Obama strategy of 2008, which you can trace back to George McGovern in 1972 and other successful candidates. He's extremely well organized, which, by the way, is one of the things that shows he might be able to actually have the infrastructure to be competitive in a general election. The Trump campaign has very little, essentially no organization here. They were trying out similar problems in Washington State, where they realized, we need to get people to run as delegates in Washington State, but they sent out a blast email to their Trump supporters in Washington, D.C., which actually is very far away. And they did it 2 days after the delegate, the time when you could get on the ballot to be a delegate in Washington State had already closed. So Trump is doing a smart thing to stay in New York and hope he can run up the delegate count there.
Eric, as you look at the playing field now, regardless of who comes out of the GOP U.S. Senate primary, can any of them win in a state like Colorado if Trump or Cruz are at the top of the ballot?
I think it's going to be tough no matter what Republican is on the top of the ballot, even if one of their, the candidates, a Rubio, a Kasich, somebody that people thought might be a more attractive general election candidate, had somehow walked away with that nomination, dialing the clock way back. This was always going to be a tough race in my mind. Let's not forget that Cory Gardner was the best candidate the Republicans had on that bench by far, that he ran in the best year Republicans are going to see in a long time, 2014, that Mark Udall entered that race with some weaknesses, political weaknesses that Michael Bennet doesn't have. And at the end of the day, Cory Gardner won by under 2 points, 1.9 points. Here you have a presidential year, a whole different turnout equation, Bennet with some strengths that Udall didn't have, and mainly no Cory Gardner to run against him. So it's always going to be a heavy lift, a tough lift. On the presidential side, quickly, I get a real kick out of the extent to which Ted Cruz has now become the savior of the Republican establishment, which had no use for the guy a month ago, much less 6 months ago. But all of a sudden, he is the only thing standing between them and Donald Trump, and the manner in which the establishment is awkwardly embracing Cruz. even if Cruz could pull off this nomination, I think it is increasingly likely that we're going to have a contested convention. I think unless Trump can have another surge of momentum, and all the polls seem to be tracking the other way, even though he'll do well in New York and New Jersey and some other places, but his unfavorability numbers are completely underwater now, not only with the country at large, even with Republicans.
Even with his base of Republicans.
Even with his base of Republicans, he is so far underwater, it's hard to see how that reverses, and that he is able to get to that 1237 magic number prior to Cleveland. So if Ted Cruz walks away with that nomination, well, it spares the country from Donald Trump and spares that party from Donald Trump. But is Cruz a whole lot more viable against Hillary Clinton than Trump is? He's a different candidate, but I'm not convinced he's a terribly viable candidate. The Republicans are still holding very bad cards.
Penn, while Colorado Democrats probably aren't getting cocky, do they have a lot of reasons to walk into the situation feeling confident, seeing Ted Cruz come to town and 13 U.S. Senate candidates being willed down to probably at least maybe 5 or 6 at least? Should they be feeling confident?
No. And nor should you be complacent. I mean, the reality is in the Senate race. I agree with Neville, with David. Neville's probably the one most likely to come out, but I also agree with Eric. I think the stars are aligned, and the current political environment is such that no one who gets this Republican nomination is going to beat Michael Bennet, given the current context we're working in. And part of that is impacted by the National Republican Party and this entire primary season they've been going through. And Eric is right. All of a sudden now, Ted Cruz is everybody's best friend. And I watched some of the morning talk shows this morning with Lindsey Graham during his redemption tour, because 5 months ago he was saying if somebody in the U.S. Senate killed Ted Cruz on the floor of the Senate and we had the trial in the Senate, nobody would ever get convicted because we all hate his guts. And it's kind of, it's worse than damning with faint praise. It's damning with no praise, because everybody's saying we can't stand him, we hate his guts, we think he's horrible, but we prefer him to the other guy whose guts we hate even more, who we don't like, so we'll make him our nominee. And for some reason, I guess it's because they've decided we got to be conservative. We'd rather be conservative and go down in flames than consider nominating a guy like Kasich, who is not a flaming liberal, but who at least might be more palatable to a broader portion of the general electorate. And I give Kasich credit, because everybody's telling him, get out, you're stealing my votes, and he's just hanging in there saying, yeah, I'm stealing some of everybody's votes because I'm the only one acting like a rational adult in this room. Just a fascinating environment to watch.